I'm Emily Lunt, and I believe with my whole heart and soul that our homes are places where we can seek and love the truth, celebrate beauty, and learn good things every single day. That's why I'm educating my kids at home, and I know you can do it too. Welcome to Heart and Soul Homeschool. Lindsey Vroegindewey, welcome to Heart and Soul Homeschool, friend.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
Yes, this is so fun to get to talk to you. So we sort of had like a ships passing in the night experience earlier in the spring at the Teach Them Diligently conference in Branson. I realized after the fact that you were there, and so we didn't get to meet in person, but I've been following your work ever since. And you are just quite a lady. You really have a lot going on, and I'm excited for our listeners to hear more about it. So let's just jump right in. Do you want to tell us a little bit about you and your family really quick?
Yeah, absolutely. I am in Montana, born and raised, aside from a couple of years in North Carolina, been here all my life. And my husband is from Holland. We met when he was in Canada. He immigrated here legally. He immigrated here legally.
That's an important distinction these days.
I know. These days, we did all the paperwork and all the money. And we have three kiddos that we homeschool. So, yeah, we love it here. We're happy to be here. And my husband's able to work from home as well.
Yeah, that's such a sweet thing to homeschool with your husband at home. My husband works from home too, and it just adds a richness to our days to have dad around that we love. So we feel really lucky. I know you guys do too. So before we jump into what you're doing now, let's talk about Lindsey, kind of pre-homeschool Lindsey. So tell our listeners what you did, because you had quite a career before you became a homeschool mom.
Yeah. Does anybody else feel like there was me before,
yes.
me after?
Yes, there was. And it's all good, right? I think it's good to process through this. And the reason I want to talk to you about it, I'll just kind of set it up a little bit. Because as the landscape of homeschooling changes, there are a lot of women who are stepping away from careers to be homeschool moms, and not careers they hated, not careers that they were just like, it's okay, but careers that they really loved. And that was you, wasn't it?
Yeah. You know, how fortunate it was that you and I both had careers that we loved. I mean, a lot of people are forced to work and they don't have jobs that they love, but it was really, really hard for me to leave my job with the House of Representatives.
Yeah. So tell us what you did there. Because you were really successful.
I was a chief clerk of the House when I resigned, and just kind of worked my way up, fell in love with the legislative process. And then in Montana, the chief clerk is appointed by the Speaker of the House. So in 2011, I was appointed chief clerk of the House, which really... it's kind of like the hub of the legislative process. All of the bills come in and go out, so I'm like the train depot, making sure all the bills are in the right spot and it's flowing correctly. And, a bill goes from a bill draft to committee, to the House, the Senate, to the governor's desk. So my job was just to oversee all of that, to hire staff, to oversee that and just make sure it runs smoothly. So really, I love the legislative process. I love what a bill goes through from start to completion. It just blew my mind, the entire process. So I love being in charge of that. I loved working with the legislators. I love the staff. And it was really hard to let go.
Yeah, it is. And I think, so I had a career in politics also before. And I think that there's that sense that you're involved in something bigger than yourself. And I think that's part of what I loved about it, was it felt like I was serving my community, like I was just part of something really good, and kind of standing in the gap as a Christian, seeing what was going on, kind of being on the inside there, where you could pray over situations that you saw that maybe nobody else saw or knew about, but just kind of feeling like God had uniquely placed me and some of my other colleagues who love the Lord and were following him in those situations. And so I think when it came time to step away and be a mom, that was always my dream. While I was working, I always knew that I wanted to be a mom. But when that rubber meets the road and you actually step away, I think there are challenges to that, because it kind of feels in some ways like your world comes to a screeching halt on some ways. And then in other ways, it's like, man, that really took off and that got really crazy really fast, having little kids at home. And so as I was listening to you talk, it sounds like the Lord gave you the gift of administration and the gift of keeping things running. And those are great skills as a mom, right?
Boy, I should really do more of that around my house. It's amazing. You're at the Capitol. Things are running like a top. You're good. You've got your skirt on, your coffee, your computer. You're just working away. And then you go home and you're surrounded by littles and you're like, oh my goodness, my day just exploded. And so,
It
yeah,
may be
it
a
is,
little more unpredictable sometimes, right?
it is completely, but such a joy. And I think for me, it was, I did do one session with my little guy when he was born, and I just had to reevaluate. I was like, oh, I want to be chief clerk for 60 years. I want to be the longest serving chief clerk in Montana. And I was like, well, when I'm 80, what am I going to be proud of that? Or am I going to have missed so many moments with my kids? And what is my real purpose? We have this really short life. We
Mhm.
cannot do it all. We cannot do it all and do it well. So how do I want to, I don't want to be, how do you spend your dash, right? Everybody
Right.
says that. How do
Yeah.
you spend your little dash?
Yeah.
And I thought, I want my kids to serve the Lord when they grow up and leave the house. I want to homeschool them so that I can be in charge of what is going into that. And
Mhm.
then it was a no-brainer, but doesn't mean it wasn't easy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think sometimes the things that are hard maybe are simple when we lay out the pros and cons, but it doesn't mean that it's easy to execute. But I think what you said, kind of prioritizing your life and when it comes to your later years and you're looking back over that short window that we have as moms and that short window of time that we have to actually pour into our kids and really invest into them, it's really short in this game of a life. And so I think, I was convicted, you were convicted that at this point in life, like that is the most important thing that I can do. And I really feel called to it. And I know that you do too. And I think that story of you being willing to step away, maybe what Lindsey wanted to do and to prioritize the calling that God's placed on your life as a wife and a mom is really inspiring and encouraging. Because sometimes I think we can feel lonely, right? When we're doing that.
Yeah, and there's some great gals that have said, find your joy and in your home and that is your mission field is now it might have been legislators and so
Mhm.
many opportunities to pray at the Capitol. And now I'm surrounded by my mission field or these little people that I want to turn their hearts toward the Lord, and that there's opportunities, all day long. So in the midst of dishes and laundry and sleepless nights, your mission field just changes, and learning to find joy in that, and that is your career is takes time, but is great. It's great.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful life, I think, when we lean into it and really kind of relax and just lean into that calling. So that's probably a great transition point to talk about one of the big projects that you, as a woman who's driven, to always have a project. I think you and I talked about that we don't sit around a lot, right? So the project that you're working on right now is a really cool one called Big Sky Life Books. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think it happened when I had little kids, so I was reading a lot more children's books, and my husband also loves bookstores, so we were always in bookstores, and I would look at the children's sections, and it was like, well, where's all the good books? There's all this agenda and stuff on the front of these covers, and I know these aren't wholesome, but I know there are really great wholesome books like Corduroy and Curious George, and I couldn't find them. So, and in talking to elderly friends, they also said, well, we want to buy books for our grandkids, but we don't know what's good, and there's no bookstores to go look at them
Mhm.
anymore. I mean, very rarely. So
Yeah.
I had a dream, and I was like, well, I woke up and I asked my husband, I said, what if we created this bookstore where like everything was safe, everything was wholesome. We've pre-read it all. It's all good. You can judge a book by its cover. It's just this beautiful store online, of course. And he's
Yeah.
like, well, let's do it. So we did.
Yeah, that's such a neat story. So you said a word that we don't really hear a lot these days, wholesome. And then when we do hear it, I feel like it's kind of like a put down, almost like, oh, you're wholesome. But it's such a great word. When you say a book is wholesome, what do you mean by that, Lindsey?
Well, and being in this business, I realized that people have definitely different definitions
There's a
of that.
range of wholesome, right?
Yes. Yes. So for me, that just means there's no agenda being pushed. We kind of follow the Philippians verse of whatever is pure and true and
Hmm.
lovely, kind of weighing that with our books. But so we don't push an agenda. We don't have inappropriate content, negative behaviors that aren't addressed.
Hmm.
But I really want kids to read our books and come away with more imagination, more creativity, desire to go build something. So I want to spur those things on. So those are
Hmm.
things we look for when we're picking out books, and also discipleship tools. We sell a lot of those
Hmm.
because we know that so many like-minded moms are trying to disciple their children in the Lord as well. So that's
Yeah.
kind of my
your plumb line that you use. So, I mean, it really is. So you go to the library with your kids, and I know a lot of families that have just kind of stopped going to the library because there's so much to wade through. You really just can't trust what your kids are going to see there. And it's certainly like in our family, I call it guided browsing. Like my kids can't just wander the library, unfortunately, anymore because there is such an agenda being pushed there. That's pretty obvious if you bother to look at the titles that are put out, and display. But I think even if you look at the titles that maybe aren't pushing values explicitly that we would not agree with, the quality of children's literature is just not what it used to be either. And so like the number of words on a page is so much fewer, the richness of the story, the writing, the descriptions, it's just lacking. And so what I love about your bookstore is you use a lot of, I guess we'd call them sort of retro books, right? In your library. Yeah.
Vintage. Oh, I love the vintage collection that we sell. And, one gal, Tabitha Page, I'm sure you've seen her beautiful children's books. She also talks about that. Like even the illustrations aren't as good as they used to be. Mm-hmm. So the writing and the illustrations, I know I tell my son, Abraham Lincoln walked miles just to get a book. And he walked to everybody around him just to get these books so he could read them because he didn't have any. And now it's just, Dogman and fluff books and, what does Charlotte Mason call it? Twaddle?
Yeah, twaddle is the word. Yeah. Yeah. And the attitude. So one thing that we focus on a lot in our family, I have an 8-year-old. And so we don't need any help developing bad attitudes in our house. We're kind of at that age where sassiness comes very naturally. And if I'm being honest, she gets it from me. But when I read children's books, so many of them just display poor attitudes, disrespect towards parents, unkindness towards siblings, all of that. And so the books in your store free of all of that, right?
Yeah. In fact, we have turned down so many books, even books by Christian authors, because when I look at a book, I go, okay, if you buy this book from me and you read it to your 3-year-old, are we going to introduce negative behavior in your home? I would be mortified if that happened. So, and I don't need any more negative behavior in my home. Oh my goodness, we could share stories. I want the books to just demonstrate positive behavior. So instead of a book about, don't be unkind to your sister, I'm sure that's the title of the book. Instead, we sell books where it demonstrates siblings playing well together and getting along, if that makes sense.
Yeah, just sort of that proactive behavior, like this is what we should be doing rather than showing all of these bad behaviors that may or may not be resolved at the end of the story. There's no ambiguity about, what our expectation is and what you said about, what is good and true and beautiful and lovely, like the scripture tells us to focus on. And I think that it's sort of a lie of our culture that in order to recognize the good, we have to show that with bad, right? I think people use that story about learning to be a bank teller and recognizing the counterfeits. And you recognize counterfeits by recognizing the real bills, not by studying all the different counterfeits. And I feel like sometimes that analogy is sort of overused, and especially in the homeschool world. But I think it's a good one for this because, we help our kids recognize and have those virtuous behaviors by showing them. They don't need to wade through all this other garbage to get there.
I agree. I hadn't heard that about the bank tellers, but you're absolutely right. And I've also seen these books will have the negative behavior and then it's not resolved till the end of the book. Mm-hmm. Well, if you have a 3 to 5-year-old, man, you've lost them. They just remember that first negative behavior and they didn't follow through to the end. An adult would follow through to the end and, get it, but a child wouldn't. And I agree. So we even have an entire vintage collection because there's so many wonderful books of old that are still being published. So I was so excited to get them in the shop. And we sell a lot of vintage books as well. Yes,
I love that about your website. And like you said, they're beautiful books. So I think, again, just this highly developed artwork, these beautiful paintings and illustrations, with sweet kids and happy kids, man, just the goodness that brings to our kids' lives. And in this short amount of time, like we were talking about, we just have a little bit of time in the scheme of life to pour all of this good stuff into them. And so I know in our house, we do our best to use that time so wisely. And I know you guys are doing the same. So we will link to the bookstore. And you've been so kind to give us a code. Do you want to tell the listeners about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Heart and Soul. The code Heart and Soul will get you 10% off your order.
Yeah. So we're
no limit.
Yeah, that's amazing. So we're really excited about that. And I know people will run over to shop. Christmas is coming, right? The holidays. So it's a great time. But before we go, let's just talk just a little bit, because I think, one of the things in our culture is that we as women have been told that we can have it all. And we talked about that at the beginning with our careers. But having it all, you have a lot going on, right? What does it look like to run an online bookstore, to be an entrepreneur? I know you've got a lot of other things you're doing, a conference for the state of Missouri or Montana for homeschoolers. You've got a lot going on. So what does it look like? I mean, are you sitting around sipping your latte leisurely, running your bookstore, or does that look like a lot of late nights, Lindsey? Because I think sometimes as moms, like, we think we've been told we can have it all, but it looks like a lot of hard work. What does that look like in your life right now?
Boy, it is a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a lot of hard work. It is definitely late nights. So my kids go to bed at 7. The littles go to bed at 7. My son listens to Your Story Hour, history episodes after that for an hour. And then I get to work. So then I'll work till midnight on the bookstore or the homeschool things we're involved with after that. So I try to go, okay, mornings are kid time. And what's hard with that is, contacting publishers and doing all of that. Well, nobody's around for a phone call at 10 o'clock at night.
Right.
So the bulk of our business is done through email. So my hours are, 8 or 9 until midnight, but it's also constantly reevaluating, like, okay, it is a busy time of life. We're not going to be creating reels on Instagram. We are not going to be doing blogs. We're just, packing orders and maintaining what we have now. Oh, I have extra time. Maybe I'll pop out an email to my customers. So it's just this constant reevaluating, because as you know, it's busy. It's super busy.
Yeah. And the struggle, I think, too. So you're doing a great thing for the Christian homeschool community by providing this service as sort of pre-vetted, mom-approved, wholesome books, which is truly a need in our world. And then balancing that with your calling and your own family. And I think, like, very few of us have time to just have one calling at a time. I don't really think that in these tumultuous times that very many of us have the luxury of just focusing on one thing. And so I think your example in keeping the main thing and sort of prioritizing that, keeping things in their proper place is really inspiring. I hope that encourages some of the moms listening, who might be thinking, oh, I see this need in my community, whether that's starting a business, whether it's starting a homeschool co-op, a homeschool group, just inviting someone on a play date. What's your advice to those moms who are looking, just thinking like, should I step out? Is that the right thing to do?
Oh my goodness, do it. We started a summertime moms group here, and the need was so great. And this isn't going to bring an income, but getting moms connected was so great. So just do it. Start like a Telegram or a Signal group on your phone and just invite moms to go meet up and keep it super informal. You're not prepping anything. And then if you wanted to, start a business and sell something, what are you good at? Candles, soap, cards? What brings you joy? And then start small and see how much time it, sucks from your family. And if you can manage that, and go for it. You can always stop. Just go for it.
Yeah. What a great word of encouragement as we end here. Lindsey, you're going to stick around. And so I hope everyone else will come back next week, because we're going to talk about some of our favorite wholesome books that we love to read with our kids in the holiday season. So thanks for sharing your story on this episode. And for everyone else, I hope you'll come back next week.
Heart and Soul Homeschool is a podcast presentation of the Herzog Foundation. The views and opinions expressed on the show are those of the host and guests, and not necessarily the views of the Herzog Foundation. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode of Heart and Soul Homeschool.